everyone. So we are going to talk about planting a bare root tree today. I have about an 8-foot tall sugar maple. It's just over an inch in caliper, a little inch and a half maybe in caliper. And we're going to walk through the steps of planting this particular tree. Now I already have my hole dug. Your hole should be about 2 to 3 times the size of the root ball for this particular size of bare root tree. So I've got my hole dug. I do have a cone in the bottom. Most of our bare root trees, they have kind of a hollow directly under the trunk. So we put a cone in the bottom that helps support the tree and keep it upright. This particular tree's been soaked in water for about an hour to 2 hours prior to planting. That's the recommendation for your bare root trees. Bare root shrubs would need soaked for about an hour before you plant them. That gets the roots really hydrated and gets them ready to be planted. So we're going to walk you through the steps of planting the tree, and then we'll stake it towards the end. So let's get started. Okay, so I put just a little bit of dirt in the soil to help hold this tree upright while we're working on getting the rest of it filled in. This soil here has a lot of clay in it, so I did go ahead and add some potting soil to my mix as I'm putting it in. That'll help loosen up the soil a little bit, especially right at first as this tree is getting started. So I'm going to keep putting some more dirt in this hole, and we'll keep going. At least at first, I don't really want to dump the soil back in. We've got a lot of smaller roots in the bottom, but once I've got it kind of steady, we'll go ahead and add some more of this dirt in around these roots. And keep going with our pile of soil. Now ultimately, as we look at this tree, we want the top of our soil line to be just above where our roots come off. This is called the root flare. Now you can see a spot right here. This is where this particular variety was grafted onto the parent stock. That's going to stick up above the ground, and we want it to. One of the biggest issues I see with trees being planted is they're planted too deep. For trees, the roots need to be right at the surface so that they can get oxygen. So when we plant a tree too deep, the roots will try and come to the surface, which can ultimately lead to some issues. The tree's not going to be as long-lived simply because it's not getting the oxygen and things it requires. So when I put this tree in, I used my shovel to get a general idea of where my soil level would be, so I have it relatively similar to what is outside. So you see this tree, it's planted to right above where my root flares are. So let's keep filling this hole. Now we want to use looser soil around our trees. We don't want to use big clods or rocks. These are relatively young trees. We want them to establish. I'm sure we live in the Flint Hills, so they're going to run into rocks eventually, but the fewer rocks they have to deal with when they're first getting started, as well as the less competition they have to deal with, ultimately the better for these guys. So I've got my hole almost filled. And then once we get the hole filled, we will stake the tree and add some mulch on top. And I'll talk about another one of the most common issues I see with people planting trees and mulch. Now as we look at staking this particular tree, with a tree this size, normally I would only use one stake, and I would run it on the west side of the tree, north to south, and it would ultimately go in the ground at an angle like this. That will be sufficient to keep this tree in place. However, this one does not have a really big root system when compared to the rest of the tree. So I'm gonna use 3 stakes, at least for the first few months till the roots get established, and to kind of hold it in the place that I want. So we almost have this one planted. We don't want to tamp the soil down. We don't need to get it really tight in around those roots. Okay, so this particular tree is planted. Let's look at getting it staked. My goal when staking a tree is really to keep the root ball from moving. I want the top of this tree to have the ability to move and sway, so when I stake it, I'm not going to truss it up like a Thanksgiving turkey so it can't move. That sway and movement on the top of the tree is going to help develop the taper and help make a thicker, stronger trunk. So we really don't want to have this tree really tied up tight. So I'm not going to put my support, my stakes, and run the strings all the way up to here. I'm going to run it more like here, so this top has the ability to move. And I want to keep it still enough that the roots aren't going to be shaken out of the ground, but I still want it to be able to move and bend some with the wind. So I am using a system. It has 3 stakes. Like I said, normally for a tree this size, I probably would only use 1, but this one really has kind of an underdeveloped root system on one side, so I want to make sure that it is really well supported. So I'm wrapping this around, trying to keep it fairly flat and level. This is fairly soft, so it's not going to scratch up the bark or damage the tree. I don't recommend using just wire. Wire will cut into the tree, can cause some issues, and cut into the tree bark. So using something soft. If the only thing you have is wire, take an old garden hose and use a garden hose, cut pieces of it to run the wire through. So instead of the wire being what is touching the tree, what's touching the tree is actually the soft garden hose. So I'm gonna get this tree staked and supported because we have some thunderstorms coming in the next couple days. I'm gonna tie this off loosely here for just a minute because I want to take a look at this tree and see, after I have the basic supports on, and see where I need to move it so it's standing up straight. So we'll get this sucker tied. And come and take this one. And I can already tell this tree is leaning towards my house, so I'm going to want to have this one tighter so I can pull it this way, which means I'm going to need to loosen up my other sides. So I'm going to tighten this one up so we keep this particular tree standing upright. I'm going to walk around, move back a little bit. It looks like it's standing pretty straight. I need to loosen these up a little bit on this side because I've got him a little too tight to be able to have some freedom of movement. And then we'll get it tied up. So we don't want them so loose that they're not doing anything, but again, they don't need to be so tight that the poor tree looks like a Thanksgiving turkey. And we'll loosen this guy up to stay here. And with that, you can see he's still got the ability to move a little bit, but the soil's not rocking too much. So I am gonna water this guy in really well before I apply the mulch, so I can see how much the soil is settled and how much more I need to add to it. So two of the biggest issues that I see with people planting trees is, one, they plant their tree too deep, and the tree ultimately will have a shorter lifespan simply because it's not able to get the oxygen it needs being planted too deep. The second biggest issue that I see people do with trees is they plant them at a good depth, but they either use mulch and they make a giant cone of mulch way up on the tree trunk, or they build those cute little berms around the tree, again, you know, a foot in the air, fill those in with soil and they plant them, and then they have this cute little berm around the tree. Well, it looks cute, but unfortunately it's also shortening the lifespan of your tree. So when we're putting mulch around a tree, don't put the berms around the tree if possible. Again, they look cute, but they're gonna shorten the lifespan of your tree. And the roots will actually grow up in the berms, so you're not keeping your plants up here out of the root system. But when we put mulch around a tree, we want it to look more like the cone of a volcano than a cone. So we're gonna have fairly shallow mulch here. We'll have maybe an inch or two, but out here we'll have kind of a ring that will, in theory, help hold a little bit of water before it runs off, but is also a good way to keep us from getting lawnmower or weed eater blight where we hit our trees with either of those implements. And it also helps keep the grass and the weeds away so our tree has a better chance to establish. So, time to mulch the tree. Really, any type of mulch will work. Rock is not the best. Wood mulch is ultimately your best option. And there are a lot of relatively inexpensive options out there that you can get. This particular bag was less than $5, so wherever you want to buy them, you can. Okay, so I've got my base layer done, and I'm actually going to take my mulch layer out to my stakes so that my husband doesn't have to mow or weed eat around this. Or I do some of the mowing as well too. Whoever does the mowing in your house. Okay. Got a good ring of mulch going. While you're planting a tree is a good time to check and see if you have some grubs or other issues in your yard. I found several while I'm digging, so I'm going to look at applying some grub preventer. But while it's not perfectly round, there is a pretty good description, general ring of how you do mulch around your tree. So this mulch is going to serve multiple purposes. It's going to keep weeds from growing up and competing with my tree, and it's also going to keep the soil cool and help hold on to some extra moisture so I'm not having to water as much. Now I'm going to water this tree. If we don't get a lot of rain, it's going to get watered a couple times a week. Just check the soil and make sure that the soil is damp. You can drown a tree, so just keep an eye on the soil and an eye on your temperatures. But that is kind of the basics of mulching and also planting a tree. So happy growing, everyone.